If you want to break limits, you have to break the chains of the limits that you've created for yourself in your own mind. It's not about the world stopping you. The world is actually a surprisingly malleable place, but most people are limited in their capacity to affect change because of their limited beliefs about their ability to do so.
Mike Maples Jr. He's a co-founding partner at Floodgate. He has been on the Forbes Midas list 8 times in the last decade and was recently profiled by Harvard Business School for his lifetime contributions to entrepreneurship. Some of his early investments include Twitter, Demandforce, Twitch, and Applied Intuition, among others. Mike is also the best-selling author of Pattern Breakers: Why Some Startups Changed the Future. During our conversation, we discussed the many lessons that Mike learned from his dad, who just passed away 7 days ago. I especially enjoyed when Mike shared the deeper meaning behind the phrase, "do your best." I loved his favorite verb, noticing, and how we all can become better noticers of the world and why that will help us as leaders. We are all figuring it out as we go. Every once in a while, I'll meet the genius who does have it more figured out than most. But almost across the board, once you really get to know the people and you get inside a little bit more and you dig deeper and maybe you have multiple conversations and you have dinner or something like that, we're almost all figuring it out as we go. And to me, that is massively inspiring. That is like, there are no limits to what I can do. All right, Mike, man, it's a pleasure. I love your work, and it's so great to have you here on the Learning Leader Show. Welcome, man.
Thanks, Ryan. It's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to it.
So to start, I know this is very fresh and new, and your dad passed away a week ago, but I loved reading the kind words you had to say about him, as well as others that poured in online. And you started by saying he was a mentor, a friend, and one of the greatest inspirations of my life. I would just love, Mike, to hear more about the impact and maybe even a story or two about your dad and how he influenced you so much.
Oh man, there's so many, and it's a little bit fresh right now, right? Because
Yeah.
he passed away a week ago, almost exactly. Um, the there were a few things about him that were really remarkable. Um, this is the meta lesson I learned, and then I could tell a kind of a fun story or two. But he used to say, "Do your best," and most people, when they say that, they mean it in a platitude sort of way. But he meant it in a very deep way. So what he understood was that there's only one you, and you don't know how much time you're going to have in this life. You might have a short life, you might have a long life, but you've got to decide what you want to do with the gift of your time. And the best way to honor the gift of your time is to be the best version of you that you can be. So there are a lot of people that I admire in business. I admire Elon Musk. I admire, uh, you know, um, Mike Moritz at Sequoia Capital. There's a lot of people that are really smart, talented people, but I shouldn't try to be like them because they already have a monopoly on being who they are. And so I can't do better than my best. That's all I can do. But the thing that's inspiring about it to me is that everybody has a unique strand of DNA. No two people who've ever existed in the history of humanity are exactly alike. And so what that means is that everyone in this world has a comparative advantage. That everyone in this world has an opportunity to be the very best at a certain thing that's matchable to who they are as a unique individual. And so like what I've learned is that a lot of people try to say compete by being the best. Not the same thing, right? It's kind of understanding, what is the intersection of what you're passionate about, what you're good at, what you can get paid for. Um and if you do that well, you're impossible to compete with. You won't be the best, you'll be the only. And so like that was the main lesson I learned from him. but it wasn't just about doing your best from an achievement point of view. Doing your best is about gratitude. It's about expressing the gratitude for the time that you're given. It's about honoring the gift of your time. Uh, yeah. So that was there's a lot of things I learned from him, but that's the high order bit. Um, the other thing that I learned from him was that just the power of focus. So like one time I was like 5 years old and I'm in this fishing competition in Oklahoma, in Oklahoma City. And the I was just above the age that you're allowed to even be in this thing. And there were all these other competitors. You could be up to 16 years old. So I'm sitting there, and it's this hot lake in the summer of Oklahoma. And my dad says to me, I think that you'd be smart to pick one spot and stay there the whole time. So, how do you think we should pick a spot? Do you think we should pick a deep part of the lake or a shallow part of the lake? Do you think we should pick a part of the lake that's shaded or that's, exposed to the sun? Do you think we should, he starts asking me all these questions like Socratic method. And so we go to this part of the lake and cast the line. And he goes, you may not win. There's a lot of people in this contest. And, there are all these 16-year-old kids running around in their overalls, different parts of the lake. But we stayed in one spot the whole time. And I end up catching this carp and we end up winning. I end up winning this competition. And I'm like 5 or 6 years old. I can barely hold the trophy. It's almost as big as I am. And, it was such a great lesson in the power of focus and sort of playing your game. Everybody else would like cast their line and they don't catch a fish in 15 minutes. They're off to the next spot. And everybody's running around all across the lake, scurrying about, hardly even keeping their bait in the water most of the time. And my dad was just like, hey, usually you win by just being prepared and focused and disciplined. And so, that was just a classic example of how he would teach you things, and he wasn't saying, here's the lesson I'm trying to impart. It was just more like just the way he would interact with you. He would just ask you questions and try to get you to think about what you were doing.
Mm.
So he was really good about that. And I think this is part of why he was so successful at Microsoft. So, my dad ended up, Bill Gates invited him to join Microsoft and run products for
Hang on one
7.
sec. I heard that Bill Gates begged your dad to be the adult in the room at Microsoft. Did I get that? Did I read that right?
I don't know. Gates isn't necessarily the begging type, but
That's what I read. I don't know.
he's very persuasive.
Yeah.
But like my dad gets to Microsoft and you got all these really smart young people who'd been to MIT and Stanford and the top schools, and they knew tons. And it was a culture where, you want to be the smartest person. And my dad was sort of like, hey, look, all I care about is that I know that you're thinking about what you're doing. And so like, if you're going to ship Microsoft Word, I want you to describe for me a process for how that happens. And it could be your process. You can make it up. I don't care if you write it on a slide or a piece of paper and crayon, but I just want to know that you have a thought process here, that you're not just coding like a banshee for 100 hours a week and we'll see where it goes someday. And so he was very good at sort of not being prescriptive, but he would be very Socratic. And in the conversation, he would force you to reckon with the fact that you hadn't really thought about what you were doing yet. You were just kind of just jumping into the fray and just trying to overpower the problem by outsmarting the problem. And so my dad used to say to me, sometimes it's more important to be proactive than smart. And that, if you have an intentional strategy about how you're going to go about something, you'd be surprised how few people really do. You'd be surprised how few people, most people, life just comes at them every day. And he was always like, you should be very intentional about how you choose to spend your time and your energy and what you want to focus on.
Mm. Sounds like an amazing man. So cool. I appreciate you sharing all that,
He
Mike.
lived a great life, and he impacted a bunch of people, and it was just it was sad to see him go, but it was fun to see all these people emerge, from 30 years ago or more who'd said, oh man, I really missed him and enjoyed
Yeah.
working. Yeah.
A celebration, a pure celebration. I appreciate that. So I want to pivot to something I read that you had written in Pattern Breakers, and I'm going to actually go to the back of the book or close to the back of the book. What did you learn? I believe you're in second grade. What did you learn from Jonathan Livingston Seagull when you were in second grade?
Oh yeah, it's a great book, right, by this guy named Richard Bach, and so it was popular in the early '70s. That book, and there was another few that I really liked at the time. Be Here Now by Ram Dass, and Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance by Robert Pirsig. And so okay, but Jonathan Livingston Seagull is a seagull, and he's in a flock, and he says, I want to fly uh, faster than any seagull's ever flown before. I don't want to just eat scraps off of the surface of the ocean and be a dirty, yucky looking bird. I want to achieve perfect flight. And all the other seagulls are like, dude, you're crazy. We're seagulls, right? This is how we're meant to live. Just quit having these goofy fantasies about what you could be. And eventually they get so tired of him that they cast him away from the flock. And um, so, I saw this book on my dad's table, and it was a small book. And I asked him what it's about. And he said, well, it's classic. My dad, he's like, well, why don't you read it and tell me what you think it's about? And so I read it, and I said to him, and I doubt I had the words, but this is kind of what I got from it was that, so by the way, Jonathan Livingston Seagull does achieve perfect flight. Um, but like to me, the theme of the book was that, the limits that you experience in this world are not really limits of the world itself. They're really limits of your own mind and your own self-imposed limitations. And so that if you want to break limits, you have to break the chains of the limits that you've created for yourself in your own mind. It's not about necessarily the world stopping you. The world is actually a surprisingly malleable place. Um, but most people are limited in their capacity to affect change because of their limited beliefs about their ability to do so.
Why do we put these self-limiting beliefs on ourselves?
Yeah, I think that we're, without realizing it, we're our own biggest critic. If you think about just the mind chatter that goes on, and I'm guilty of this as much as the next guy. Maybe you've found a way, Ryan, to solve for this, but like probably within a minute of time, there's some background noise in your mind saying you're not good enough, this isn't going to work, what if you say the wrong thing here, what if you do this wrong? It's there all the time. And what I've kind of learned is that I've never found a strategy to make it go away. You could meditate, you could do a bunch of things. So what I do now is I just say, oh, well, that's my mind being rude to me and saying those things, but I don't have to listen to that. I don't have to buy into what that voice is saying. I can choose what to do in this moment. And I can just kind of like, almost look at that voice like it's a comedy and not a tragedy. And just say, up there you go again, saying your negative stuff. Well, who says you get a say? And so like that's I think a reason that a lot of us are self-critical all the time as a background part of our operating system in our mind, and we start to buy into those beliefs of the self-doubt. But then I think also we get told, as we grow up, when you're a little kid, you you turn a box into a fantasy rocket ship and pretend that you're an astronaut, and you imagine that you could do all kinds of things. But then as you grow up, you get told that you need to stay within the lines, and this is the rules, and you get good grades when you give the teacher answers the questions they want to hear. You get rewarded for achieving in the existing status dominance hierarchy according to the rules that govern that status. And so I think you just start to become much more tuned into the opinions of the other than your own independent ideas about what's possible. And so I think that that's another thing that gets beaten out of us over time, unfortunately.
You know, Mike, I have a thought on this that has been helpful to, I think, get rid of that voice in my head. And I wonder if you've experienced the same thing. So I'll surface a thesis and then you can respond. After 618 of these conversations over the past decade, I feel like I've been so fortunate to meet some of the greatest leaders in the world, people who have accomplished massive, massive things. And I'm often asked, what do they have in common? What do they share? And that's some stuff that we're going to talk about with pattern breakers and things that you've learned as well. And there's a lot, but one of them that comes up so frequently is we are all figuring it out as we go. Every once in a while, I'll meet the genius who does have it more figured out than most. Every once in a while. But almost across the board, once you really get to know the people and you get inside a little bit more and you dig deeper and maybe you have multiple conversations and you have dinner or something like that, man, we're almost all figuring it out as we go. And to me, that is massively inspiring. That is like, there are no limits to what I can do. Why not have, like, one of the crazy things I'm thinking about now is like creating the biggest, best leadership development festival of all time. That is a stupid, crazy idea. Who am I to think I could do that? But then I think, why not? Why not? Somebody's got to do it. You know what I'm saying? So why not me? And that's because of talking to so many people who have done massive things that figured it out as they went. And I'm curious, from your life, I mean, you're backing people who have crazy ideas and some of them hit. So some of them probably are like actual geniuses, but I bet, I don't know, you tell me, a lot of them just kind of have been really good at figuring it out as they go.
Yeah, and it's funny. The expression I use colloquially is everybody's winging it.
Yeah.
Like even most successful people, like I remember when Trump first ran for president the first time, I'm like, I was talking to somebody about him and, I'm not all that political, but I'm just like, he's winging it. And they're like, well, do you think that means he's going to lose? And I'm like, not necessarily. That may be why he wins, but like, everybody's winging it. And they're like, not everybody's winging it. I was like, no, everybody's winging it. Everybody. Like the sooner you figure that out, the better. And he ends up winning. This friend of mine goes, oh my gosh, Trump was winging it and he won. And I was like, I told you. but like everybody's winging it. And like that doesn't mean you don't have a plan. That doesn't mean you're not prepared.
Yeah.
But sometimes you have to believe even when you don't believe. And
Yeah.
it's like you just have to have faith that you'll get through it and that just because you don't know how the dots are going to forward connect doesn't mean they won't connect. And it's like, you live close to the Wright brothers, right? And all the scientists of the world were saying it was going to take 1,000 to 1,000,000 years for flight, and it was a waste of time to even try to do it. The science couldn't let it happen. Well, the Wright brothers realized that they don't get to decide who invents flight. The person that does the job gets to decide who invents flight. Mm-hmm. And so, like, it's the person who gets on the playing field and plunges ahead through the uncertainty that gets to define what the future is going to be, and they get to define the patterns that we're going to all have to react to. But it's not like they're all that different, other than just the fact that they're willing to stand up and try to make a difference. They're like that seagull, right, who's willing to pursue perfect flight without knowing exactly how he's going to get there.
Yeah, you're right. In Pattern Breakers, George Melville, who was the U.S. at the time, in 1901, was the United States Navy's chief engineer. He called aviation, quote, a useless dream. And the Wright brothers were flying an aircraft 2 years later. That's the stuff, like, I am juiced by people that think that crazy, that are like, no, we're going to go do this. And that's kind of like what your life's about, right? You're backing people. You're putting your money behind people who have crazy beliefs and thoughts like that. I'm just curious, what made you want to get into that line of work to back people who are crazy enough to invent something or to try to create something that others say, what are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense, or that will never work. And they say, oh, I think it will. And then away they go.
Yeah, and it's funny. I like to say to people that I have a specific set of skills. So, like most business people are probably more along the sensibilities of somebody like Warren Buffett, right? So Warren Buffett would say, "What's a good company? A good company has a competitive moat. It, has a brand. It has persistent advantages, and it compounds over decades." A startup doesn't have any of those things. Startup doesn't have a moat, doesn't have customers. All it is the founders and their idea. And so what I realized is that startup capitalism is different. So a startup capitalist doesn't create value by persistently compounding. A startup capitalist creates value by changing the subject. They create something radically different that's never been seen before. And that's how they add value to the economy. And so, like, when it comes to startups, I like to say better doesn't matter. Only by being radically different can you make a radical difference. And
Mm.
so I just got really excited and inspired by people who do that, by people who are daring enough to create these legendary, radically different ideas, most of which won't work. But it's like, we would all be still living in caves if somebody wasn't always willing throughout human history to imagine that there is a better explanation for how the world could be. And so those people inspire me, right? I think you can be a very successful go with the flow type of person, but the people that I get excited about show up in the world differently. They're not people who want to go with the flow. They're people that want to be like Jonathan Livingston Seagull or Jack Dorsey, or, I wish I'd been smart enough to invest in Brian Chesky when I met him at Airbnb, but like those are the kinds of people that get me excited.
Let's compare and contrast that, okay? So you were on the Forbes Midas list, I believe, 8 of the past 10 years, and that's the list of the essentially the best investors in the world. Is that accurate?
Well, people have had some good wins in venture capital.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So best investors in the world, you're on that list 8 of the past 10 years. So undisputed, and you talk around this industry, and Mike Maples Jr., like everyone's like, that's the dude, that's the guy. So let's compare and contrast Twitter, which I believe was called Odeo when you invested, versus Airbnb and Brian Chesky, which it sounds like is one that you passed on. Can you take us inside your mind, the meetings, the conversations for Twitter / Odeo, as well as Brian Chesky and Airbnb?
Sure. And they'll probably, it'll be useful also in illustrating, like when people describe startups, sometimes it sounds like a case study that's tidy somehow. And startups are wild. They're like capitalist mutations. It's like spotting a new kind of bird in the Galapagos archipelago, right? And so, you know, um, Twitter started out as a podcasting company called Odeo, and I was very excited about podcasting. And I met Evan Williams. He had started a company called Blogger before that got bought by Google, and so he'd already had a success, and he had a very elegant product. And I was like, okay, I want to do this. First ever angel seed investment I'd ever made. And so,
Wow.
a week after my check clears, Apple decides to give podcasting away on iTunes. This is before the iPhone, right? So, like, there weren't any devices to play podcasts on other than iPods to speak of. So, Apple has a monopoly on the playback device, and they're giving podcasting away on their iTunes service. You're like, okay, that's a real problem, right? Like, I'm not sure we have a business. And so Ev tries to figure out a business for the better part of a year, and he can't find one. And so eventually he calls me and says, I've just decided I'm going to give all the investors their money back. And because some of the investors were disenchanted, and why do I still have my money in this thing? It's not going to work. It's not a good startup. And so I was like, look, you don't owe me anything. You win some, you lose some. He goes, look, I'd just rather give everybody their money back, and I'll just own all the intellectual property, and all that. And so I said, okay, that's cool. Do you have any other ideas? And he says, well, we're working on this thing. It's a side project right now. We're either going to call it voicemail 2.0 or TWTTR. And I said, well, what does Twitter do? And he says, well, you say what you're doing. And I'm like, okay, then what happens? He goes, that's it. Oh, I forgot, 140 characters or less, because we want to be able to do it with SMS messages. And I was like, okay, um, what's the revenue model for something like that? And he goes, there is no revenue model. And I was like, well, what other features do you have in mind in the future? What's on the roadmap? He goes, there is no roadmap. And I said to him, Ev, why do you think this is even a product, much less a business? And he said, oh, I have no idea if it's a business or not. But I figure that with when I wrote Blogger software, that a million people wrote blogs. And podcasting is a little hard, right? You got to upload audio, you got to have the right equipment stuff. I figure that if you made it really easy for people to write a tiny little blog, like in the form of a tweet, that maybe 10 million people would do that. And if that happened, then the burden of proof would be on the people who are negative about the idea. And so I was like, okay, I want to invest in this, And he says, well, there's nothing to invest in. There's no company. There's no product. And so then it blows up at South by Southwest. And all of a sudden it becomes kind of an early phenomenon. And I'm like, well, now I'm probably not going to get to invest in it. Everybody's gonna be chasing it. One day Ev calls me and says, hey, did you mean it when you said you wanted to invest? Because if you meant it, now's the time. I've reserved an allocation for you if you're interested. So, he was honorable to me twice, right? Giving me my money back and then letting me invest the next time. And it was one of those things where there's so much drama, right? There was the fail whale. There was like, who's going to be the CEO? Is it going to be Ev? Is it going to be Jack? Is it going to be Dick? Is it going to, what's going to happen? But it was just a great idea. Some ideas are just, it's like you trapped lightning in a bottle. It doesn't matter how you execute, it just destined for greatness. So that was Twitter. Yeah.
How much are you investing in the idea versus how much are you investing in the person or the people involved?
I'd say it's more biased towards the people involved, but with a caveat. Like, it turns out, in my experience, they're not independent variables. Yeah. So a great founder will be discerning enough to allocate their limited time to an idea that's worthy of their time. And so if a founder that you think is great is pursuing something not so great, that's a yellow flag that you overestimated the founder. But what's interesting is the very, very best founders that I work with, they have an authenticity to them where you're like, oh man, if anybody in the world was going to do this idea, it would be this guy. They're just the perfect person to do it. Ev was the perfect person to be a co-founder of Twitter because he'd done blogging software before. He just had a very natural set of instincts around self-expression. He was early in Web 2.0. He was just from central casting to be part of something like that. You can't fake authenticity. And most of the great startups come from very authentic founders, and their authenticity gives them a competitive advantage. It gives them a first mover advantage into the future because they have a better set of instincts about what needs to be built. And they're more likely to convince other people to follow them because their authenticity is contagious.
They just have such a core belief in the thing that they're doing that it just almost rubs off on you, that they have this confidence and belief in something that doesn't, because like looking back, it's easy. Well, obviously Twitter works, or obviously you should have invested in Uber or Airbnb or, all of them. It's so easy looking back. At the time though, none of these things that you invested in were quote working. They were just an idea with a person or people. That's the thing that's so hard, because then we're trying to look into the future. We're trying to make these strategic bets in the future. It's easy looking back, but so hard looking forward. So you're saying a guy like Ev, you just felt was the right person at the right time with the right idea with the right amount of conviction that the thing would work.
Yeah. And if some of your fans are like NFL football fans,
Yep.
it reminds me of like, so unfortunately, I rooted for the 49ers last year. I was at the Super Bowl rooting for the Niners, and we're playing against the Kansas City Chiefs. And it's towards the end of the game, and it's overtime. And it's like the Chiefs have the ball. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh crap, it's Mahomes. What's he going to do to us this time? I don't know what play he's going to run next, but I know that I just am like, my whole body is clinched up because, oh God, it's that Mahomes guy again. And it's like, the great founders are kind of like that, right? You just want to hand them the ball and wait to be amazed. And they just have this ability to just overcome whatever circumstances are in front of them. And part of how they do that is through their authenticity. They're just so obsessed with the idea that they're pursuing that they come up with the right product ideas because they're genuinely interested in what they're working on. But then they also just have this determined view of what the future needs to be. And that determination is contagious, right? And I'm sure part of why Mahomes succeeds is, the players on his offense are like, okay, this is our time. This is our moment. We got this. Mahomes is going to take us there. Oh, we're in the red zone now. We score when we're in the red zone. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh, crap, now they're in the red zone. And it's like, he's going to score. No. It's like watching a slow motion train wreck if you're on the other side. But like, if you back founders who have that set of skills in their domain, you don't need to know how they're going to succeed specifically, just that they will or that they're likely to.
It's so cool to see the Mahomes type, the MJs back in the day. Kobe had it, where their belief in themselves, their preparation, their work ethic, their history it almost raises the level of the people around them, because they want to be able to hang with him, be a teammate who adds value. And so those people are so I remember Pat McAfee made this great point when the Tampa Bay Bucks signed Tom Brady. They said, what I don't think everybody understands is he's going to raise the level of performance of every single person in the entire building. The equipment guy will be better. The trainers will be better. The person making the food in the cafeteria will be better. The general manager will be better. He'll go get more players. The coaches will raise their level to the people like that. Not only are they excellent at their craft, but they're also really good at raising the expectations and their performance, I think, of others around them. And that is leadership. Like, that is being a leader, is raising the level of performance and expectations of those around you. I feel like that's what you've probably got to experience in the startup world.
Yeah, and it's really not fun to compete against people like that, right?
No.
So I remember a few years ago, so I like Steph Curry a lot, right? The Warriors. And so they're playing against Oklahoma City, and there's this film of him going up. It's like the very end of the game. They're just barely down. And you hear a fan in the audience who's filming it saying, not him. Don't let him have the ball. Not him, not him, not him. And he goes across the half court line. He's like, not him, not him. And he just heaves this ball up from downtown and hits a three on the buzzer. And he goes, no, not him, not him. Or, that's what the French were saying, in the
Olympics.
Yep. Why did they keep giving it to that devil? He would just, every time, he would just heave it from, it's not like it wasn't occurring to them to try to stop him, but it is just like, you get into that zone where you just know you can't be stopped.
Yeah.
And, and that you're right. It feeds that energy, feeds on everybody else on the team. The team starts to develop a belief that they just can't be stopped. And that's really hard to compete against.
Yep. Let's flip it to the opposite side of things. I don't know this story. The Brian Chesky, looking back, obviously, Mike, you should have invested in Airbnb. What are you thinking? You're stupid. What do you mean? Oh, why not? Yeah. So what happened there?
Well, so this was kind of a funny thing. So the prior week we've been pitched by a company called Mojo Mix, which was you go to a website and you specify ingredients that you want in your cereal. And then it assembles those ingredients and ships it to you in a box. And my partner Ann and I are looking at this thing, and at the end of the meeting, Ann's like, "Why did we take this meeting? This isn't something we invest in. We don't invest in cereal companies. We have no business even talking to these people. I mean, I wish them well, but it's not our business." And I was like, "Well, it's technology enabled cereal." She's like, "Come on." And so a week later, uh, I take this meeting with at the time it's called Air Bed and Breakfast. Um, and we walk into the conference room and it's full of cereal boxes, Obama O's and Captain McCain Crunch. And people don't remember this, but he financed the company in the early days by selling cereal boxes because
Yeah.
he couldn't raise money. So we walk in there, and Ann kind of looks at me like, "Maples, what the hell? Another cereal company?" And I'm looking at her like they didn't say it was cereal, like so I'm like, "Hey Brian, what's going on here with this cereal?" And he goes, "Well, we're funding the company by selling cereal. Would you like to buy a box at $30 for a box?" And I made my first mistake. I declined. So then he says, "Okay, we're Michael Seibel, who introduced us, says that you don't really like slides, you like demos, so we're going to show you the software." I was like, "Great, that's right." So he tries to get the software to run, and he can't get it to work. So for some reason, the server's down. So I'm like, "That's okay. Slides are okay. We'll just look at slides." He goes, "Well, I didn't bring any slides because I heard you like demos." So we're sitting there. We're 20 minutes into the meeting, room full of cereal boxes, and I still have no idea what they do. We're just looking at each other, right? This conference room. And so then he says, I Airbnb, Air Bed and Breakfast, we let you rent an extra room in your house, and then you give the person an air mattress and you serve them Pop Tarts the next morning. And so I'm like, okay, I'm like, I'm not sure I get this. Isn't there something already called couchsurfing.com and it's free? Why are people going to pay for your thing that costs money when it's free with couchsurfing.com? And he goes, "Well, because it's not about price, it's about trust. And people are going to want good pictures of the place that they're staying at, and they're going to want a trust rating mechanism." And that's where I made the mistake. I didn't realize what his insight was. His insight was about the internet and trust mechanisms, and Facebook Connect were going to make it possible for you to create a substitute for the trust that people had in hotels. He was right. It wasn't about price. It was about trust. But the meeting was just so convoluted and screwed up that I just didn't see it, and so I missed it. It was the biggest miss of my career by a wide margin. So I would have made God, it hurts to say, I would have made over 5,000 times my money if I had said yes to it.
Whew.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess those are the ones you learn from. But did you feel something special in Brian Chesky, though? I mean, because now you look at him like, this dude's amazing. Like every time he speaks, we're all taking notes. Every podcast he goes on, whatever he's talking, I think he's almost universally admired by all who study this stuff as being one of the best CEOs in the world. Could you sense that years ago in him?
Yeah, I mean, I thought even then that he definitely had this X factor to him. And
Yeah.
and to kind of give you a sense of that, I ended up introducing him to Reid Hoffman, right, who's the founder of LinkedIn. And I said, "Reid, I don't know if this is a fit for me, but this guy is interesting and he's somebody you should know. And I don't know if you're going to want to invest in Air Bed and Breakfast or not, but I think this is somebody you need on your radar because he's going to do something." And I should have known, right? I just should have known better. But sometimes you have so many meetings and you meet with so many companies, and the meeting was so convoluted and screwed up, and I just wasn't awake enough to the possibilities, and failure of imagination.
Yeah. No, that's part of the game though. That's part of the pain, and that's how we learn from that. Mike, I'm looking behind your left shoulder and I see a sign that says practice reckless optimism. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, well, it was given to me by a founder, actually. So somebody that I worked with twice, a guy named Dominic Zane, gave it to me for Christmas one year. And kind of the idea is that you want to believe that a different future is always possible, always around the corner. And so I like to think of myself not as an investor, but as a co-conspirator. I think of a startup as an optimistic conspiracy theory to make a better future. And most people, we haven't really talked about this, but most startup ideas that are great are disliked by most people at first,
Mhm.
because if human beings are conditioned to like things. So if everybody likes your startup idea, it's too similar to what they already like.
Yep.
The best startup ideas force a choice and not a comparison. This is not a startup, but it's an example of the thinking. The Tesla Cybertruck. Um, you know, you may want one, you may not want one. You might think it's ridiculous. I When I first saw the Cybertruck, I thought maybe Elon was joking. Is he really going to ship that? But like nobody, when they see a Cybertruck, ever says, "How does that compare to a Ford F-150?" Right? It's like live in Elon's future or don't, but there's no comparison between the two. You can't reconcile the two things. And so that's what I find startups are that way when they're great. They start out by being non-consensus and right. So it's almost like you're the Ocean's 11 team trying to rob the Bellagio safe, right? You're trying to perpetrate something, and most people don't believe that it should happen. And so you kind of believe that you're in on a secret about the future with a bunch of other like-minded crazy people. And I call that co-conspirators, right? And so I want to be more of a co-conspirator than an investor, because I think that startup founders need a different kind of help. They don't need a buy low, sell high type of helper. They need someone who's in on the secret with them and who believes in the same crazy thing that they believe, and wants to be part of the different future, wants to be a reckless optimist, alongside them.
Optimists are the ones who change the world, right? Pessimists sound smart. Morgan Housel said that on this podcast, but optimists actually make a difference. They're the ones who make it happen. They change the world. James Clear talked about on this podcast too about the fact that he wants to be around, I do too, people who are for things, people who bet on something. The only way to achieve or to experience the upside is you can't just hate on things or be a pessimist. You're not that then you're not part of anything. You're just a hater. But if you want to be a part of the upside, if you want to have a chance to make a difference, to leave a dent in the world, you have to be for things. You got to bet on something. You got to commit to something. And that's why I've loved studying your work, Mike, because I feel like that's your life. That's like your ethos. It kind of pours out of you, even as we're just talking now, that you're this guy who believes in crazy ideas, changing something in a radical way, and you're willing to put your money where your mouth is. And that's how you've built your entire career.
Well, we try, right? And I guess it's kind of a version of doing your best, right? But like,
Yeah.
it's sort of like, all right, you don't know how much time you're going to have. How do you want to use your time? Do you want to use your time succeeding by somebody else's conventional idea of success and conforming to their dogma about how things should be and trying to win within that status dominance hierarchy? Or do you kind of say, like there's a book that I really like called The Beginning of Infinity by David Deutsch. And he's this theoretical physicist who talks about how we're at the beginning of infinity of knowing what's knowable. But the good news is that all knowable things can be known. And so why not try? Why not always, what is a theory really? It's a better explanation for how things work than all the explanations we have so far. Why not always seek a better explanation? Why not always believe that if this is the pattern, that somebody can break the pattern and impose a new, better one, and then a better one after that, and a better one after that? And so, that's something I can get behind, right? Is people
Mm-hmm.
who do that. Whereas, the status quo has the word status embedded in it. And a lot of people try to protect the status quo because they're trying to protect their existing status. And I'm like, what fun is that? That's That's not a fun way to honor the gift of your time. That's just passing the time.
I spoke with your chief of staff, Sam Beskin, who, by the way, is uh, he played for my friend Rob Eson at Stanford, basketball player. And Rob texted me and said, that dude might be my all-time favorite player, and he's going to be the president of the United States someday. So just a heads up on Sam.
I'm
Sounds
not
like
sure I would, I'm not sure I would wish that on him, but
I don't know if he wants that. But one of the things he said, he sent me a list of your favorite quotes, and I want you to respond to one of them. We could have a whole conversation about all of these, but one of them is, there can't be a recipe for a breakthrough because by definition, breakthroughs haven't happened yet. Again, this is in line with what we've been talking about, but this mindset of there aren't really recipes. You have to, in a way, invent the new thing or create it, not follow somebody else's quote best practices. Can you talk more about breakthroughs and the fact that there isn't a definition because they haven't happened yet?
yeah. And when you think about it, it makes intuitive sense. So let's say that you and I follow a recipe to make a cake.
Mm-hmm.
We might make an awesome cake, but we're not going to invent something in so doing. We're following somebody else's playbook that's already been determined. Somebody else figured out how to create that cake and passed it down to us. And so if we're going to have a breakthrough, we have to do something nobody's ever done before. So there can't be a recipe by definition. So what I've learned is that it's the wrong question to ask, right? Like the question to ask is, how do I become the type of person who's likely to encounter a breakthrough, right? And so, you listen to some of the great people in history, the creative geniuses, Louis Pasteur, right, who said chance favors a prepared mind. Isaac Newton, the apple hits his head. Archimedes jumps out of a hot tub and says, "Eureka, I found it," when displacement occurs to him. The history is written in terms of them having this flash of insight, uh, almost like a happy thought. Einstein talks about how relativity crystallized for him when he was in a train and he was moving away from a clock and he saw it going off in the distance. But they asked Isaac Newton one time at a party, how is it that when that apple hit you on the head, all of a sudden gravity occurred to you? And he said, because I was thinking about it all the time. And so that's the thing that people don't get about breakthroughs, is that chance favors the prepared mind, because when you're thinking about the edge of something new for its own sake, independently, because you're intrinsically motivated by it, you're gonna get visited by luck often. But the problem is most of us are just trying to get through the day. We're trying to follow the recipe for what needs to happen next. We all get visited by luck. Just most of us don't answer the door. Most of us don't realize that we've been visited by the muse. The great founders, the great scientists, the great artists, that people have studied people who create these breakthroughs. And I'm convinced that chance does favor the prepared mind. But the reason it does is that prepared minds say yes to luck more often, right? Like prepared minds know luck when they see it. Most people don't have enough agency to realize they're always being visited by luck. But they're not, they're too focused on what's in front of them to notice what's around them. And so, like, one of my favorite verbs about entrepreneurship is noticing. And it's like, it's like the people that notice the surprising anomaly hidden in plain sight that change the future. But when you realize that, it's kind of inspiring. Inflections are all around us all the time. Opportunities to change the future are all around us, ever present. The Wright brothers didn't have any unfair advantage in inventing the plane. They were just more curious. And so, I think that's the key, right? Is to not look for a recipe or playbook, but to try to be the type of person that is going to be visited by luck more often, and is going to be awake to the possibility of answering the door when, I like to say that I think that luck has a little bit of a feminine quality. The Greeks talked about being visited by the muse. I think that, sometimes you're visited by the muse, but you have to be open to the possibility that she's going to knock. And she's usually not going to come through the front door. She's going to come through the side door. And so, you kind of just got to be awake to the possibility that she's visiting today.
I love your favorite verb. I think when I think about the most interesting people that I've ever met and the most interesting people in my life, I think they are far and away the best noticer of things, have great spatial awareness of the world and understanding. They're usually very funny. Stand-up comedians I found are probably to be some of the best noticers in the world. Nikki Glaser talked about that on this podcast. I feel like I'm name dropping the whole time, but that's just how my mind works, is from these conversations, because they're embedded in my mind. But she said that that's like her whole life is she'll be in the middle of a conversation with a friend at a party or something and notice something and say, hold on a second, and take out her phone and put the note of the thing that she just noticed, because the whole world at all times there's stuff happening that you're noticing. And I think if you almost rewire your brain to do that, that's how some of these breakthroughs can happen, because you're always, like chance favors the prepared mind, right? You're always on the lookout and noticing these things happening in the world.
That's right. Most people don't have prepared minds, unfortunately. Most people let life come at them.
Proactive again, right? Be proactive again.
Yeah, it's interesting. I love the stand-up comedy example. We've never talked about this before, but like I read this book where they talked about Chris Rock and his technique. And comedy, like all forms of creativity, usually involves forming unexpected connections. So like when you're doing a startup, you're forming an unexpected connection between a new form of empowerment and a set of desperations that people have. And you're usually harnessing something that pre-existed. In addition, you're just connecting the dots differently. Comedy, from my understanding, is very similar. You're connecting sort of the mundane, expected everyday life, and you're juxtaposing it with something unexpected. But the other thing that's similar to entrepreneurship, if Chris Rock is any guide, he'll practice his comedy lines on different audiences before he gets in front of a big audience. And startups are a lot like that too. Like you're not saying, I'm going to do this product. It's either going to succeed or fail. I better raise some money, and you're attached to whether it succeeds. You're sort of playing almost like a little kid would play soccer, just kind of kicking the ball forward without necessarily an idea where it's going to go. And you're not attached to being right away. You're willing to be just totally wrong. You're exploring a whole bunch of lateral possibilities because it's interesting. And if you're wrong, so what? It's a tiny little audience. The penalty cost isn't that high. You're not fixated on the cost of being wrong because you make the cost of being wrong zero. What you're focused on is finding a quicker path to being surprised about what's right. So then you can escalate your commitments as you increase your certainty that you're right. And that's true of comedy too, right? Like Christopher Rock in this book I was reading was saying, like, you can just tell when it lands. You could just see the way that their body language and their eye was on that one I'm going to use. And so I think risk taking is a lot like that. Like you want to make it so that you could take risks where the cost of failure is as near zero as possible, so that you could take as many risks as you want. And then double down only when it works, only when you're surprised to the upside. But it's kind of a different way of thinking about risk, right? It's about thinking about I'm going to make the cost of failure so low that I'm just going to keep trying until I massively succeed.
That's the thing. It becomes a quantity and endurance thing. I was just reading about James Dyson, now Sir James Dyson, right? He got annoyed by the bag at his vacuum cleaner. And so he's like, I just got to get rid of this stupid bag. I need to create a bagless vacuum cleaner. Well, you know how many times it took him to get it right? Just over 5,100 tries, right? That he messed up, but he learned after each one, and eventually he got there and became a billionaire. And I think he's the sole owner of that company. So it's like the combination of a an idea, a willingness to experiment, a willingness to be okay when it doesn't go well, a willingness to be resilient and to respond and to learn from that failure so that when you go back the next time, you're a little bit closer. You're a little bit closer. And most people are just not willing to endure all of that. They'll quit, they'll stop. That's the difference between a James Dyson and everybody else. And I think that, though, is a key learning for all of us as leaders is whatever the thing is that we're doing, a big part of it is just being willing to continue on, to push through, and to make sure you learn from the small experiment before so that you're better the next time. And I guess, though, that's got to be a commonality among the leaders that you have backed that have gone on to do really well.
Yeah, but it's funny too. Like, we're talking about noticing things and being awake to stuff. Earlier you mentioned my chief of staff, Sam Beskin, right, who was on Stanford's basketball team, and I think he played, on other teams as well,
Mm-hmm.
graduate school. Not long ago, I was working with him to chart out my time management strategy for 2025, and I had a very comprehensive way of thinking about it. And he said, when I was at Stanford, the basketball coach, they would come up with a game plan and they would think about every play and all this intricate stuff. But then they would create a 1-page 3 keys to winning summary. And Sam said that the coach would say to us, if we do these 3 things, we will win this game today. And he's like, everybody on the team knew it. Everybody on the team knew the 3 things they had to do. The next team that he was on, the coaches would have this 1 page, but it would have like 20 things on it. And it would be like in tiny little, footnote sized type. And he's like, the problem with that is there's no keys to winning then. If you have to remember 20 things, you remember 0 things. And so I was like, dude, you're totally right. Like, we need to redo this plan. Like, we need to be thinking the 3 things, because like we've got a team at Floodgate, and like the associates need to know what they care about when they find the next Twitter, the next Thunder Lizard startup. And if I have some comprehensive, spreadsheet of 20 different things classified, I might impress myself with how smartly arranged it is, but it's not executable, right? It's not executable in the same way that 1-page 3 things to do game plan. It's not enough to be smart about what should happen. What you want is the thing that everybody is willing to get behind and do, that's better than good enough, right, to win. And like, Sam, like, I mean, you could have just said, okay, yeah, whatever, let's do this spreadsheet, right? But like, you have to be like, wait a second here, he's totally right, right? He's given me a helmet adjustment in a nice way, but like, he's just totally right that that's what we have to do. My problem is not that I need to be more precise. My problem is it needs to be addition by subtraction, right? That's what I need to be focused on right now.
Yep. It's like the old saying that the word priority didn't used to be pluralized, and if that's even the right word, it didn't used to be a plural word. It used to be singular. What is your priority? And now it's become, these are our 12 priorities. And if you have 12 priorities, just like if you have 12 values, you pretty much don't have any, right? You got to, even if you don't have to list everything out that is important to you. I think you have to focus. I love that idea of the 3 keys to the game. I heard that's what the new New England Patriots coach Mike Vrabel is very good at, is 3 keys for the offense, 3 keys for the defense, and 3 keys for the special teams. And everybody in the entire roster has to memorize those 3 keys before every game, and they get quizzed on it. And so they understand it's just these 3 things. We're focusing on these 3 things if I play offense, defense, or special teams. And I think simplifying that also, it's hard. It's partially why Twitter works. The forced constraints ended up being a great thing for it. And the same goes for time management, for keys to winning a game, and just in life in general. Mike, if you have time for one more question, and we're a little bit over, but I have one more.
You bet.
Yeah. Um, let's say you're meeting with somebody who's a recent college grad, like Sam's age, or maybe a little bit younger, and they come to you and they actually don't fully know what they want to do, but they do want to leave a positive dent in the world. What are some general pieces of life / career advice you'd give to that person?
There's two. The first is to internalize what it really means to do your best. And so, doing your best means being the best version of you that you can possibly be, as a way of expressing gratitude for your time, and comparing yourself to the best version of yourself you can be rather than comparing yourself to others. Avoiding the trap of mimetic desire and this tendency to define your thinking according to other people's thinking. um, People would be so much better off if they understood that early in life.
Mm-hmm.
People waste so many of their best years trying to succeed according to somebody else's idea of what success is. So that'd be the first thing. The second thing, it took me a little while to figure this out, but eventually I got there. I call it the T of knowledge. So I have a broad variety of worldly wisdom topics. I learned this from a guy named Charlie Munger. So I try to know, like, in the fields of art, physics, uh, economics, game theory, system level thinking, engineering, politics. Um, what are the very best ideas that have ever existed in those fields? Um, because that's kind of like getting worldly wisdom. And I just think that, if you read Aristotle, if you read Machiavelli, if you read Sartre, if you read the all these different people, Graham Wallace, The Art of Thought, all these different people, it's like they're your friend, and you got to know them, you got to spend time with them, and you got to, like, learn ideas that have stood the test of time for centuries sometimes. Marcus Aurelius, all these people. But then the reason it's a T is, I think you want to have one area in life where you are fanatically obsessed with knowing more about it than anyone knows. So, like, for me, that's like startup greatness, right? Like, I have a database of every company that I know of in history in tech that would have made more than 100x on the first check. And I try to get a time capsule of those companies. I try to get the seed round pitch deck. I try to understand what the founder was like at the time you would have had to decide. I try to figure out whether our frameworks would have caused us to say yes, or whether we need new frameworks, or whether we need to discard some. But, like, is that going to lead me to the next great startup? I don't know. Probably not. Certainly not in the next week. But, like, I just feel like if you do that, over the course of 10 years, 20 years, you just have a gigantic database of greatness in the back of your mind of what greatness looks like. And, if nobody else is willing to do that, I just think you have an advantage, right? I think but you come by the advantage honestly. But, like, in England, you have these guys, they call them train spotters, right? They have these journals and they look at trains coming and going, and everybody thinks that they're socially maladjusted. Why would anybody be so interested in spotting trains? I think everybody should try to be a train spotter in something that matters to them. Like, I'll talk about what makes a great startup. I'll talk your ear off, and everybody around me will be like, "Hey, Maples, we're supposed to be having a party here. We're watching a football game. You don't have to talk about these esoteric details of a startup nobody's heard of." But, like, I'm just that interested. Like, I care that much. And so, like, I encourage everybody to have the broad worldly wisdom, but then the T of knowledge where they're a train spotter. And the advantage to that is that, like I understood when Bitcoin came out, I understood why a lot of what's profound about it could be understood by understanding equations of heat and energy and conservation of energy. And I understood that like fiat currency does not have conservation of monetary energy and that Bitcoin does. And I knew that because of that, it was a superior feedback loop system than any other currency that existed. You wouldn't have connected those dots, right? If you hadn't spent time understanding, the equations that govern thermodynamics. Um, but you would have never known that when you were studying it. You just had to decide it was worth your time to engage with that topic because it was a way to honor the gift of your time and do your best.
Mike, I could talk to you all day, man. I really appreciate this. We definitely need to do a round two. The book that I highly recommend is called Pattern Breakers: Why Some Startups Change the Future. The reason why I liked it, there's many reasons. One, the guy who should write this book wrote this book, Mike Maples Jr. Right? You're the guy to write this book, but also the combination of the fascinating stories. And I don't think this is just for people who are into the world of startups or investing. I think this is into people who care about humanity, who are leaders, who care about excellence, which is really the avatar of the Learning Leader Show, right? All about understanding excellence and becoming a better leader and impacting people in a positive way. And I think that's what Pattern Breakers is all about. And that you could tell your heart and soul. And I know you wrote it and rewrote it multiple times. I talked to Sam about that you weren't okay to release just a good book. It needed to be excellent. And that's what you've done, man. So thank you for being here. Thank you for writing Pattern Breakers. And I would love to continue our dialogue as we both progress, man.
Cool. Thanks, Ryan. I really appreciate it. It was an honor to be on your show. Some of your guests I'm big fans. Like Coach Stoops not long ago, huge fan. So, it's an honor to be included with that group of people.
Oh man. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, man.
All right. See you soon.